One of our amazing viewers, Jake Patrick, challenged me to do an Ashardalon's Stride Specialist build. I thought that was a pretty neat challenge. I was excited to tackle it, and I'm happy with what we came out with. This character can do some seriously massive damage if the situation is correct, and when the situation isn't correct, it has other options. So let's get into it. Let's start by breaking down Ashardalon's Stride a little bit. What it's going to do is it's going to increase our movement speed by 20 feet, going to make us completely immune to opportunity attacks, and then everyone, and I mean everyone, including allies, that you pass within 5 feet of is going to take a d6 of fire damage. No save, just does the d6. So obviously this weaponizes our movement speed, which brings us to which race we're going to want to be. We're going to want to be a Centaur, which comes with the highest base movement speed. So we're going to have 40 feet of movement speed, and as soon as we add Ashardalon Stride, we're going up 20 feet for a whopping 60 feet of base movement speed. This is going to make it very likely that we can run by every enemy we need to. And what's cool about Ashardalon Stride is if you have a tangle of a whole bunch of enemies and allies, you're very likely to be able to take a route that hits all the enemies and none of your allies. Kind of like an AoE damage, but you can specialize exactly what kind of AoE you want to hit, which is pretty awesome. Now, as for our stats, we are going to want Charisma first and foremost, then we're going to want Constitution, finally we're going to want Dexterity. But these are all important enough that if you're doing a point buy, a +1/+1/+1 to get 16, 16, 16 is what you're going to want to do. As for our class, we're going to be a Draconic Soul Sorcerer from level 1 all the way to level 20. This gives us a cool flavor moment as well. Instead of being a normal Centaur, we're going to change our horse portion to be the bottom half of a golden drake or dragon. We're going to start out with no wings, but once we hit level 14, we're going to get wings from being a Draconic Soul Sorcerer, so it's kind of cool. I think there's some storytelling potential there while we level up into our wings. Maybe that's something that's important to our character. But I also just think having a lower half golden dragon is sick. So from levels 1 to 4, I'm thinking that you just kind of play like a normal sorcerer. Don't worry about it too much. You can stay at range, use Firebolt, use your fight winning spells. We're good to go. We really begin to become what we're going to be at level 5, because that's when we get Ashardalon Stride. So let's dig into Ashardalon Stride a bit more. So as I said before, Ashardalon Stride, you can really think about it as an AoE blast. The more enemies there are, the more effective it's going to be. So let's start out by saying there's 5 enemies. So if we cast it at 3rd level, we're going to do a d6 to all of those enemies. So we did 5d6 that turn. There's some ways we can start compounding that damage even higher. First way to do this is that we have 60 feet of movement. There's a good chance that we can run by all 5 of those enemies without having to dash. So what we can do is we can actually use our action to hold a move action and do something really general that's very likely to happen. The first time an enemy moves, I will use my move action is an example. So that turn ends, and you can only do the fire damage once per turn, not once per round. So by holding an action, when you go to the next turn, you can move again, and you can do all of Ashardalon's damage again. So instead of doing 5d6, it became 10d6 to those 5 enemies. Now there's another way of compounding it. We upcast extremely well. Think about this. If you cast it at a 4th level spell, you're doing 2d6 of damage. So that 10d6 quickly becomes 20d6 of damage, turn in and turn out. That's excellent damage. And that compounds more the more enemies there are. Now you're not always going to want to use your action to hold a move action. An example is if there's only 1 enemy left, there's really no point. It's just going to be 1 to 2d6 damage more. So we want to mix in some non-concentration actions. This is where our 1st and 2nd level spell comes in. If we have non-concentration spells that are strong, like Tasha's Mind Whip, for example, this is a great time to use it. If we're facing 1 enemy, what I might do is change to a more ranged combat style. Use Firebolt, use Mind Whip, use Mind Sliver, and kind of stay back and let my allies kind of take over, being in the forefront. But if we're not wanting to use our 1st and 2nd level spell for that, we can also just kind of move into our cantrips, because we can do something like Booming Blade and then have the free disengage, so they're kind of a little bit stuck where they're at. Something else to consider is that once we hit level 6, all of our spells that do fire damage once per cast does an extra charisma modifier amount of damage. So Green Flame Blade can actually kind of shine here and do some extra damage, as well as Firebolt from range. So those are spells we might want to be looking at more if we're wanting to do more damage. Other things we should consider with our spells is to cover other weaknesses. So I really like to think about it this way. Ashardalon Stride is our core, and everything else we're doing is supporting it. And that's why we take 1st and 2nd level spells that solve our problems, like the problem of a single enemy. That's a problem for us, so we can take Tasha's Mind Whip. We can't climb worth a damn as a Centaur, so taking Misty Step. This is another good example of solving our problems with a 1st or 2nd level spell, which is important because that way we keep all of our spell slots for Ashardalon Stride. And what about if an enemy is completely immune to fire? Well, that's where our Metamagic Transmute comes in. Metamagic Transmute is awesome for saying, hey, we're facing an Iron Golem, fire's going to do jack squat to it, so I'm going to change it to cold damage or lightning damage or whatever it's not weak to. Alternatively, if you know an enemy is weak to a certain damage type, you can also change to that to do double your damage. So that 20d6 quickly becomes 40d6. So at the end of the day, what are we? Well, we specialize in doing a ton of damage to a bunch of enemies. We are an AoE blaster of sorts, but we use our mobility and we weaponize it instead. Pretty interesting and unique build for for sure that that's a playstyle that's gonna be hard to find basically anywhere else. And we combo that by rounding out our weaknesses, so we are pretty steadfast in general. But even with our rounded out weaknesses, we still have some standout weak points. The first of which, and probably the most obvious, is our wisdom saves are pretty dang bad. Resilient wisdom is going to be something we seriously consider to round out that weakness. A less obvious weakness is the fact that we do a little bit of damage to a lot of enemies. Make no mistake, we can do absurd amounts of damage, but we do require our teammates to capitalize on that damage that we're doing, to take those softened up enemies and get kills. Thank you for the challenge build, Jake. That was a ton of fun, and I would love to hear what you guys would do with your own Ashardalon Stride build. If you're interested in supporting the channel and getting a bunch of benefits while you're at it, check out our Patreon. Other than that, guys, hope you have yourselves an amazing day, and I'll catch you on the next one. See you later, bye.